Fantastic. So we're very lucky today for today's talk to have Hazem Mahmoud here to speak. So Hazem is the Director of Products and Services at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. So the PJM Foundation has been a longtime partner and collaborator with BWorks, the BWorks Summer Institute, and has really been sort of the driver behind a lot of the outreach activities we've been able to do throughout the last several years, and has been just an incredible partner on sort of developing sort of our education and the sort of the content that you're learning today and throughout this next month. The talk today is titled Power and Responsibility, AI and Technologies Impacting Society, which is just an incredibly germane area to be talking about these days. It's a fast developing field, as you are all very, very well aware, and how do we best leverage that for the betterment of society is just critically important. So with that, I am very excited to introduce Hazem and have his talk today. So thank you very much for joining us, Hazem.
Thank you, Scott. And it's good to meet all of you virtually. And thank you to the BWorks Summer Institute program at MIT for hosting this. It's from what I've gathered, it seems like an incredible opportunity. So kudos to all of you for participating in it. And I hope the rest of your summer program goes well. So I'll share my slide deck and I'll kind of go through the content here, but of course, I would like to leave room at the end for any questions anyone might have. So let's just kick it off. So again, my name is Hazem Mahmoud. I'm the Director of Products and Services at the Patrick McGovern Foundation. And so what we do at the foundation is we're a philanthropic institution, right? So we provide funds and grant dollars to organizations to advance AI and data science solutions to create a thriving, equitable, and sustainable future for all. As it relates to myself and the team that I work with, I lead a team of engineers and data scientists that work on developing responsible and safe AI products for the social impact space. And so we actually develop in-house products, we deploy them, and we also do other activities like consultations and so on. Before I get into the actual meat of the presentation, I just wanted to share with all of you this tool called Braid that's actually coming out of, it was developed out of the University of Michigan with the partners of different universities as well. And really it's a platform to help share stories, right? And to stay connected with folks. So as you are going through your journey, learning, trying to understand how you can participate, how you can contribute to AI and how it's going to impact our society, I'd urge all of you to share your stories and so on Braid. You can scan this QR code. Throughout the presentation, I'll have a few prompts for you that I'd love to get your inputs on, but we can definitely stay focused on the presentation and then you can respond back to those prompts later on afterwards. Okay, so first of all, what is AI for good and what does it mean for us here at PJMF? So specifically, when we talk about nonprofit organizations, right, serving the communities that they serve, we have to understand that they are at the front lines of the challenges, the needs, and the opportunities that these communities are going through. The unfortunate reality is that these communities and also these nonprofit organizations that are serving them are not necessarily at the seat or have a seat at the table as it pertains to developing technology and AI solutions that are tailored to their needs. And so that's one of the areas that we really focus on and that we develop is this idea of how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge the gap between technology providers and technology service providers and solution developers with these nonprofit organizations and with the communities that they serve, to give them a voice, to empower them to have a say in how these technologies are developed, to ensure that it's developed equitably and with the right lens and frame to solve their problems. And so that's really the importance of this idea of your voice in the story, right? Each of you come from different backgrounds, different communities. And it is absolutely imperative that you all are involved and engaged in this process in order to ensure that your community and um, the area that you represent, right, is properly represented as well. So what does that mean when we talk about developing technology solutions for good? I'll give you a quick example with an organization, a partner organization of ours called Earth Genome. So what they've done is they've taken satellite data and they've indexed this satellite data. And the reason why that's important is that it allows an average user to look through these satellite images and identify things like illegal mining in the rainforest. And understanding that that pattern and the way that pattern looks like in those satellite images to then allow an AI model to go and identify other patterns that are similar to it. So what would typically take, for example, identifying illegal mining in the rainforest could take months, if not years, for that to be recognized and identified. It can now be done literally within minutes, at most hours, right? And this allows for the ability, if you want to think of it as a Google search, right? So it's like, I want to search for all illegal mining in the rainforest. Before that used to take a lot of technical effort in order to be able to do something like that. And at this point, it's become very, very easy with an organization like Earth Genome and what they've developed there. It also other use cases as well, being able to identify plastic waste before it enters into the ocean. So plastic waste may be coming from rivers or up, from mountains or whatever, and kind of washing into the ocean so that we could do something about it and mitigate against it. And also things like greenhouse gas emissions. It's a beautiful use case, and I urge you all to take a look at it. Another one is safe water optimization. So unfortunately, there are a lot of refugee sites all over the world that are growing in population. And a part of that challenge is ensuring that there is safe water at these refugee sites. And so York University, a group within York University, has developed what's called the Safe Water Optimization Tool. And the way that it works today at refugee sites is it's a one size fits all. You've got 1,000-gallon tank, you put this much chlorine in it, and that should solve the problem of making sure that the water is clean to drink. The reality is that it doesn't, right? The reality is there are temperature variances, humidity, elevation. There are so many factors that will have an impact on whether that one size fits all chlorine level is appropriate or not for that specific refugee site. And so they've developed a tool to allow individuals working at these refugee sites to provide them with customizable and specific chlorine levels at these refugee sites in the water tanks that they have there. And again, this is to help ensure the overall health and safety of the folks who are at these sites. So my first question to all of you, and again, scan the QR code, but don't worry about answering it right now. Save it for later. But how can AI-driven tools create more adaptable solutions for global health challenges like safe water access? Right? How can we utilize and lean on AI in order to provide us with better solutions as it pertains to global health challenges that we're faced with? So I'd love everyone's input on that after the presentation. The last organization here I'll talk about is called Next Leaf Analytics. And what they've done is they use artificial intelligence, IoT devices, and advanced data monitoring and alerting technologies in order for us to do things like tracking vaccine temperatures that are being delivered to remote regions across the world. So as you can imagine, if you're delivering vaccines in these small little fridges, you need to make sure that the temperature level is safe to ensure that the vaccine potency or effectiveness of that vaccine is safe when it's actually administered. And so how do we make sure that we can track that? Well, NextLeaf Analytics has been able to build the technology to do that, again, using IoT sensing, but also AI and other technologies. Other use cases that they've been able to incorporate are things like making sure that incubators have proper power and that they're operational, there isn't fluctuations in power, and if there are, to notify the on-site staff to make sure that they address it right away. Okay, so these are just a few of the examples that I just wanted to share with all of you as far as how this AI for good field is growing. And I'm hoping that in some ways this motivates or encourages many of you to consider going into this field as you kind of figure out your career journey here. As it pertains to AI product principles, what does it mean to develop AI products or AI solutions that are safe for use and safe for consumption by users? Here at PJMF, we've put together what we call the 7 AI product principles. The first one is responsible, right? So when we develop a product, is it a responsible product? And what do we mean by responsible? Is it safe for use? Are we taking privacy into consideration? Is it appropriate, right? Some technologies, as I'm sure many of you may have heard, were developed for a certain purpose and they were misused and now they're used for inappropriate purposes, right? Is it transparent? Are we being transparent with our users about the technology stack that we're using, the AI models that we're using, the data that we're training these AI models, and so on? So that's what we mean when we say responsible. Is it people and community focused? In other words, we don't have a bunch of engineers just going to a corner and developing products. We have to work side by side with the communities that are going to be using these products in order to shape how that product is used from the very beginning. So when we're designing, when we're developing, testing, deploying, and finally maintaining that product, it's absolutely important that we're engaged with the community to make sure that it's safe and that we understand their perspectives, we being the engineers, right? Bias mitigation. Unfortunately, bias is always going to be present in AI models. I don't know if we're ever going to get to a point where it's not, but for now, that is our reality. So, how do we reduce bias? How do we mitigate against it? And how do we build guardrails around the products and the solutions that we're building in order to protect our users from that bias? Idea integration is this idea of inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, right? How do we build all that or integrate all that within our products? So to give you an example, when it comes to accessibility, how do we build products in a way that allows for folks who might be vision impaired to be able to use and engage our products? And so again, another consideration that we're constantly thinking about when we're building AI products. Human in the loop. So as it pertains to AI today, we have to be very, very careful with how we engage with it. We can't just throw an AI model at a problem and hope that the output is always going to come out the way that we expect it to come out. In all likelihood, there may be many cases where it won't. And so, how do we ensure that there is always a human in the loop whenever there is a critical output from an AI model, that we are validating and verifying that that output is correct or is what we expect it to be? Again, that's another critical principle that we build products around. Enterprise grade security, so making sure that the products are secure. So we do this by hiring security firms to come in and audit and do vulnerability assessments on our products to make sure that they're good and that they're safe for use. And then finally, sustainability opportunities. Where can we find opportunities to build products that are greener, for lack of a better word, that are environmentally sustainable? And so we do a good amount of work. Our DevOps engineer on my team does a good amount of work around how do we reduce our carbon footprint when we're developing products. And so, and by the way, a lot of these we have blogs that we've written about that you can go check out on our blog site that we could share later. But again, these are the principles by which we develop responsible AI products. And we have to be intentional as we're building these products and as we think about how do we build them in a safe way. So another quick question for all of you again to scan this QR code and answer it later. But what are challenges that arise when designing AI without input from the community it serves? So think about how an AI product or an AI solution that's out there that was developed without the community that's going to be using it, what are the challenges that could come up from that? Okay, so something to think about. We have a couple of AI products that we've built here at PJMF. I won't go too much into them right now, but one of them is called Journal Pilot. It's focused in the journalism space, so it allows journalists to engage with their social media network in a more effective way so that they can continue doing the amazing journalism work that they do. This is primarily targeted for investigative journalists and kind of small journalism shops. And Grant Guardian is another product that we just recently developed. It's a financial due diligence tool for foundations. So foundations like PJMF, like the one that I work for, as a part of the work that we do, whenever we give grant dollars to nonprofit organizations that are doing the work that they're doing, the great work that they're doing, is we go through a process of financial due diligence to make sure that this organization is financially healthy and sustainable. And so we've developed a tool, again, using AI and building upon the AI principles that we just talked about, the 7 principles, to make sure that we can streamline that workflow for foundations. So this has been going well so far. I think we have over 200 foundations that are using this product now. Okay, so all that aside, what I would like to talk about now is kind of our societal responsibilities, right? And I know many of you might be interested in an engineering career. And so, what does it mean to be developing technologies and developing products that our society is going to use? So, we have to understand first that at this point, right, AI is in every sector of our society, right? And the reason why this is important is that we have to recognize that technology shapes and remolds our society in ways that it never did in the past. So, technology today will actually shape our values as a society, what we define as good and bad, right? It will shape our relationships that we have today. It will shape how we spend our time. Those are very, very powerful influences on us as a society. And we need to understand that and recognize that as aspiring engineers and aspiring engineers, technologists, sorry. And so that's a really, really critical thing for us to get our heads wrapped around, that when you're developing a product that a community or a group of people are going to use, you have a responsibility on how that product is developed. So be a source of positive change, of course. And whether you work in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit sector, it doesn't matter, right? But that means that you have to learn, you have to participate, you have to ask questions, you have to demand a seat at the table, right? And as engineers, we all have a responsibility to do that, or aspiring engineers. So the last question I'm going to ask you here is, how do you see AI impacting your field of interest or future careers, and what steps can you take to actively engage with AI? So think about that. And not only, I mean, take the time to think about it, but think about how you can make that a reality for you, right? How can you ensure that you continue to engage and work in the AI space in a way that can help bring about positive change? One of the things to also recognize here is that, as I mentioned before, right, that we have a major impact on our society. Now, what that means is that impact translates to moral responsibility. And for all the reasons that I've already mentioned, unfortunately, the world that we live in today and the situation that it is today, when it comes to the responsibility outcomes that we have, they're unacceptable. And let me give you an example of that. If an engineer has a moral responsibility about something that they're developing or a solution that they're building in a company that they're working for, you have pretty much two options. Either you do your work or you get labeled the infamous whistleblower label, which many of you may have, read about examples of how that works. And both of those are unacceptable, right? Both of those are not acceptable outcomes for engineers as far as us raising something that is morally apprehensible to us, right? Something that we don't morally believe in. And so we need to understand that we need to do better as a technology sector and as a society in order to empower engineers to be able to call out anything that they feel is unacceptable. But beyond that, you all have also a responsibility, and there is power that you have to do. If you don't want to be a whistleblower or you don't want to just do your work, there are other things that you can do to actually move the needle forward, if you will, right? So the first thing is educating yourself, right? Through courses on ethics, privacy, inclusion. If all the courses that you're taking and all the knowledge that you're gaining is how do you code in Python, right? Or how do you do vibe coding using, any of the various tools out there, whether it's Claude or Cursor AI or whatever. That's great. Those are great courses to take. Those are great skills to learn. But you need to go beyond that. You need to understand what does it mean to have an ethical dilemma with the work that you're building, right? Or what does it mean to ensure that there's data privacy standards that have to be met, right? Or what does it mean to include certain members of our society in the products that you build? All of these things are, if you don't educate yourself in understanding what that means, then you'll completely miss the boat on what you should be even looking for, right? So balance out the courses that you're taking. Maybe some of you have started contributing to open source code. Not sure. That's awesome if you have. That's great. But consider contributing to open source tools that protect users and communities, right? There are tools that are for bias detection that help with accessibility features, that help identify potential issues with the data ingestion process that you're bringing in, right? There are all these different types of open source tools that you could actually engage in and actually contribute to. And it doesn't even have to be on a coding level. It could be contributing to the documentation, to the user experience, to a lot of different areas, right? So definitely be engaged in the open source community and in the development of these tools that will help move this forward. And then finally, at the very end, I'll say just ask a lot of questions, right? And I've mentioned this before already, but be involved in the design, in the development of this stuff. It's easier than you think. So if you, for example, are building a product in a company that you're working for in the future, you can very easily go to the product manager and say, hey, why don't we take a sprint or like a week or two to build out accessibility features in this product. Number one, it's great from a marketing perspective. It's great from, just showcasing that our product is accessible for folks. But it also makes for, more importantly, it makes for a better product for our users. And so even leaning in on product managers and asking them to look into developing solutions like that or specific aspects of that into the product is not that difficult. It's actually a lot easier than you think. And so be engaged and be involved in that overall process. This presentation is primarily geared towards college students, but that's why there's all these job boards that we have out here. But there are internship opportunities as well if any of you are interested in. But in any case, just save this even for when you go to college. There's a lot of opportunities in the social impact space. The nonprofit world is looking for highly talented technologists and engineers, product managers, and we could really use that kind of support to come into the sector and help continue to build it out. Again, the idea is about building out these tools for the communities from the ground up, because it's not always that the solutions that were built by these massive technology companies trying to bring those into a specific community and trying to retrofit it, it doesn't always work out well. And so, how can we utilize and lean on those technologies, but at the same time build custom solutions that work in an appropriate and in an effective manner for the communities that we serve? So, that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. And I just want to leave you with this last quote that, progressive improvement beats delayed perfection. So, we're not going to get this right in the very first time. It's going to take years, if not decades, for us to really understand how AI is going to engage with our society, how we are going to be able to use it to further and further benefit and further protect, the marginalized members of our communities or folks that maybe don't have access to technology or easy access to technology and so on. So it's going to take a long time for us to really understand how to engage with this, but it shouldn't stop us from trying to get it right from the very first time. So let's engage in the process. Let's work towards it, and excited to hear from all of you, whether in Braid or right now, if any of you have any questions. So back to you, the facilitator. Should I go ahead and
So if you
Oh.
want to go ahead and select one of the students who have raised hands to answer questions online, we'll then switch over to our in-person questions. But you take a handle of a few of the virtual students first.
Okay, sounds good. The first one on my screen here is Sophie. So over to you, Sophie.
Hi, thank you. Something I wanted to ask about bias mitigation. How do you approach bias mitigation when there are so many different factors without compromising the model's overall function or ability?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sophie, because at the end of the day, it is exactly a balance, right? It's no different than security, right? Security is always a balance between convenience, right, and making sure that we have secure products that we're using. If you make it completely secure, then nobody's going to be able to access it, right? And so how do you balance that? Similar idea with these AI models. The first thing I will say is we have to understand that bias is very use case and region specific, right? So what might be considered bias in one use case may not be considered biased in another use case. And the reason why that's important to call out is to understand that with each use case of these AI models, you almost have to do a full assessment of what does it mean to be biased here, right? What could go wrong? And part of that means understanding the community that's actually engaging with that AI model. Who are those members that are engaging with it? The diversity of the users that are engaging with it. So really understanding who the users are, and then going through a process of doing extensive testing to really understand what are the types of biases that can come out of that. Once you understand that and you have a better sense of all that, then you could understand and develop what you want as far as how to mitigate it and how to build guardrails around it. And so it's a fairly extensive process. This isn't something that can be done easily. You can automate it with some tools, but at the end of the day, it is a kind of a case by case basis, and it's definitely not a one size fits all type of approach. Hopefully that answered your question, but if not, feel free to send a message over. Hafsa, I think you're the next one on my list here. Hafsa Osman.
Hi. So my question was like, where do you see, okay, in your team specifically, or with a project that you worked with before, where did you see like the biggest trade-off when you were building like an AI model, like on the business aspect and like its long-term sustainability? And like, how did you navigate through that morally in that sense?
Yeah, it's another great question. I love all these deep questions that you're all asking. This is great because I mean, so we've built, like I mentioned, a couple of products. Now, the models that we've used in those products are all models that are provided by service providers, right? So think of ChatGPT, if you will. We primarily use Claude more recently, but when it comes to kind of the trade-offs, the process by which we do that is again very much tied to engaging with the communities that are serving us. So I'll give you an example with the journalism product that we built. That product, when we were using the AI models for that, we recognized that there were some situations where that model was maybe not responding in an appropriate tone, if you will, right? So something that if there was a news report that may have been a little bit on the sadder side of things, right? Something that you shouldn't be talking about in a jolly fashion. The model wasn't necessarily privy to that and understood that type of sentiment, if you will. And so working with journalists helped us to really understand that and help us understand how we can engage with the AI model through prompt engineering techniques that we did in order to get that type of sentiment or that type of tone response back from the model. So that's just one quick example of how we do that. As it pertains to Grant Guardian, we used AI models for that one specifically to read financial data. And so with that one, there wasn't a whole lot of embedded bias in the model as it pertains to like we're asking it to pull out numbers from financial statements, right? The area that we found where it could be considered, if you will, bias is around reading international financial statements because the formats might look differently. The terminology of the financial indicators will look differently for international financial statements versus financial statements that were generated here in the United States. And so that's a process that we're still actually working through. One of the things that we did was build in currency conversion. So if a financial statement had non-US dollars in there, that it would actually convert that on the fly so that you're kind of assessing it based on US dollars. So there are certain techniques that we did around that in order to again address some of those bias situations. So again, hopefully that answers your question, but if not, feel free to put it in the chat as well. The next one on my list here, and I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but is it Yingqi?
We're actually gonna
Yep.
switch to 2 in person, then we'll go back to 2 virtual.
Awesome, sounds good.
Hi. You mentioned that one of your key product principles was keeping a human in the loop. So would you say there exists a threshold beyond which a human would not have to be in the loop with AI, or what would that line look like to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, I mean, that line, I will say again, depends on the use case, right? So one of our partners, to give you an example, is using AI to detect cancer cells from ultrasounds. This is work was happening at a university called Amrita University, based out of India. And I would say, like, when it comes to thresholds around human in the loop input, right? That one is a little bit more critical, for example, right, than reading financial statements as it pertains to kind of life and death type of situation, right? And hence why it's very, very specific to the use case that you're talking about. And you'll see me mentioning this quite a bit, right? This idea that a lot of the work that you do, you have to be extremely intentional about every single specific use case, right? Again, this isn't a one size fits all. So if you're dealing with things that may involve health related matters, data privacy related matters, situations where somebody could potentially be harmed by the AI model, physically or otherwise, then obviously the criteria by which that happens increases quite a bit and requires for more human in the loop engagement. But at the end of the day, it's really about looking at where are those critical moments where the AI model has given you some type of feedback, where it's important for you to validate that feedback. So as it pertains to the Grant Guardian product, those are when the financial values are pulled from the financial statements. We have somebody validating that before it moves on to actually run the assessment. But then there are other points within the product where we don't necessarily do that. So.
Hello, thank you for your informative talk today. I was curious about your thoughts regarding the regulations on AI right now. Do you think they're too strict and it's kind of like restricting your creative freedom and it's restricting new discoveries, or do you think it's a little too loose and there's safety and privacy issues?
My goodness, you're all high school students. That's really impressive questions coming from all of you. As it pertains to regulations, that's a moving target, to be honest, right? So a lot of this depends on the political environment. A lot of it depends on what regulations are able to be passed and otherwise. And it also depends on the location, right? So Europe, for example, generally speaking, has a lot more oversight as it pertains to AI and regulating that. But if we were to take a step back and just not focus necessarily on the specific examples of whether they're too loose or not, at the end of the day, it's a matter of, it is another balance, right? Where innovation, in one way, we want innovation to happen, right? We want innovation to move forward. And yet at the same time, we also want to make sure that there are proper checks and balances for these technologies for these models that are being developed and trained. And how do we find the balance between these two, right? Overemphasizing on either side of it is a problem. And I think finding that balance, again, will depend on every society, right? The way we find that balance here in the US may be very different than how they might find that balance in Kenya or other countries. So at the end of the day, it really just comes down to how do we push innovation forward while at the same time making sure that we don't sacrifice on what we think is absolutely important. So privacy of our data, ensuring that the solutions are safe for use, that they cannot be misused, right? All these things are things that we need to look at. So it's a complicated one, but it's a great question.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch back to virtual. Janaya, can you please pick 2 students online?
Yep, the first person I see on my screen is Ying Chi.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I was wondering regarding, since AI is very rampant these days, regarding how it's used in healthcare. I mean, a lot of people may feel uncomfortable with how AI is used on their health. Example for like diagnosing patients. So how would you combat this? Is there like an optimal balance between AI and human to work with patients effectively?
Awesome question. I mean, the first step is consent, right? I mean, that the very first thing is making sure that the patients are educated on when AI is being used, how it's being used, when their data is being collected, how it's being collected, and then also giving them the opportunity to opt in or opt out. And the fact that that shouldn't have an impact, of course, on the treatment that they receive, right? Like at the end of the day, if you choose to not have your data collected, then that's something that's your choice, and that you should still receive the medical treatment that you need. So again, it's a challenging question that involves a lot of balance again, as far as like how do we notify, first of all, how do you educate users, how do you notify them, and then gain their consent, and then at the end of the day also allowing them to potentially change their mind. So not only do you gain their consent at that moment, but 6 months from now, can they come back and say, okay, I no longer want you to keep this data, and I want you to remove that. So again, that's going to be based on a patient by patient use case, as well as the type of treatment that they're receiving as well. I'm not an expert as it pertains to this specifically, but those are the things that I would be thinking about.
Thank you. And the next person I will pick is Alex.
Hello. I know you work for a company very focused on AI, but one question is, how do you choose whether you use AI for this challenge, right? Like, how do you decide whether that's worth all the overhead of making it ethical and etc.?
That's an awesome question again. And actually, that's usually the very first thing that when I'm engaging with organizations on whether they want to use AI or not, the very first thing that we talk about is should we even be using AI? And one of the things to recognize here is just because we can use AI doesn't mean that we should. And there's a lot of examples where that's the case, right? Where that was a problem in specific use cases where we didn't have to use AI, right? It was more of maybe it was an education related issue, maybe like somebody, users needed to be educated on how to use the product, or there were other options or alternatives out there for us. And yet, because AI is such the buzzword nowadays, everybody wants to use it and everybody wants to incorporate it. And so one of the things that we do with nonprofit organizations is we run through what we call a problem definition workshop. And this workshop, it's like a 3-part workshop that we kind of run them through. We have somebody within the foundation here that is in charge of that part of our learning and insights team. And in that workshop, we walk them through how do you identify what the real problem is. And there's a number of techniques and tools that you can do to do that. And then once you've identified what the problem is, which surprisingly is a lot harder than most people think, but once you've identified what the problem is, then you could look at what is the possible solutions for that. And in many cases, AI actually isn't the right solution for these, right? And And we do need to keep thinking about that, this idea that just because we can use AI, it really doesn't mean that we should, because it's, in many cases, it could be just overkill, right? We're over-engineering a problem, and many other reasons such as environmental impact and so on.
We're going to switch back to a couple of in-person questions.
I've heard a lot of things online about LLMs damaging the physical environment, like using up a lot of water. Is this true? And if so, what do you think?
Yeah, great question. It's definitely true to answer your question. I mean, it's not just about it's water, it's energy consumption. Training these models takes a lot of energy to do. There's a lot of data centers that are pulled into training of these models. And then also the use of these models by us whenever we run, ChatGPT questions and so on. And so that's something that, number one, we should all think about on a personal level with how we engage with ChatGPT, right? Are we using these LLMs for generating, you know, funny memes or, right, just things that are just may not necessarily provide us any true value or any true benefit? Or are we using them to really help us and to support us in moving forward? And so that's something that we all have to think about on an individual level. There are a number of mitigation strategies that are happening nowadays to address that. A lot of data centers are going green, right? So they use renewable energy sources. They, they figured out how to use water to cool things in a more efficient manner and so on. But then there's also other elements of that is, how do you, even to the granular level of how do you do, for example, a sorting algorithm in your code, right? Or something along those lines, right? So all to say that there's a part we can all play in minimizing that environmental footprint of these LLMs and technology in general. And again, it's very, very use case specific in these situations. So.
Hi, so I was wondering if you could give us some examples of cases where the use of AI would not be appropriate to the situation.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of them. In fact, we wrote a blog about it as well that you could check out, and we could share the link after. But there are, I'll give you one quick example of an AI use case that was misused, and this is a pretty popular one. You could read about it. It's the platform, I think, was called Compass, if I'm not mistaken. And with that platform, it was used by the judicial system in order to provide predictions on around how to provide sentencing for people who are convicted of crimes, right? And so it used certain features. When you're dealing with AI models, this idea of features is basically the variables that have an impact on the AI model and how it comes up with the predictions that it comes up with. So it used specific features that were inherently biased. And they weren't necessarily even there's a visible bias to it. Like, they might look at certain factors as it pertains to an area that somebody is coming from, right? And there's systemic bias in that, right? And so if you were to look at like zip codes, right? If you were to put in a zip code into this platform as an example, then it might, provide sentencing one way versus if that convicted, person came from a different zip code. And so again, this idea that there is systemic bias in the data that we use and in the features that train these models. And so they found that through these, through this AI, this ML platform, it's an AI model basically that was used, that there was built-in bias that they weren't even aware of at the time, and that it provided recommendations that were just completely biased to the judges at the time. And so I'm not sure what the status is of that at this point, but I believe they pulled it, and I'm not sure if they've refined it and brought it back. But that was just a quick example of one, and there's quite a few out there.
We're going to go back to a few remote virtual students, but while Janaya is picking a couple more people, just want to let everybody know that Hazem's prompt questions at Brader.io is already on the dashboard. So later this afternoon, you can go and answer those prompts and post your stories, trying to make sure that everybody can participate. Okay, Janaya.
Yep. So we'll have Ethan Lin.
Yeah, so hello. I was kind of like really interested in your discussion on AI, and I remember one time I heard something about how AI was kind of biased towards our not biased towards marginalized groups because some of them don't have that much historical data since because of like history and everything. So in cases like these, how do you combat that? How do you try to work around that and try to help people in these marginalized groups who don't have that much historical data to them?
Yeah, great question, Ethan. And I think the best way is to probably give an example. I'll give an example of an organization we just started working with called AI Empower. And what they do is they recognized that voice recognition technologies like Siri, as an example, and others are biased towards individuals who are maybe are from the stuttering community, right? That stutter when they speak, as an example. And so if you or if you know anyone that maybe when they stutter when they speak, if they try to use a technology like that, it provides a completely horrendous user experience, right? And so this organization, actually, the founder is from that community, and so they actually took it upon themselves. I believe she used to work for Google, if I'm not mistaken, maybe Facebook, I can't remember. And she recognized that's a problem, and so she went and started this nonprofit organization on her own, and developed the data set that's needed, because even the data set didn't exist, to your point, Ethan, right? So that data set didn't even exist. So went out and actually collected and gathered that data set, and then proceeded to then train these smaller models on that data set. And then took it a step further because, okay, that's great. We got the technology part figured out, but then where's the impact, right? And that's always the question, like, where's the impact? Took it a step further and reached out to all the major technology providers of like, hey, here's how you can train these models to make sure that it incorporates, individuals from that community. And so really it's about each and every one. I mean, it's a beautiful example of how we are all empowered to be able to do that kind of work regardless of which community you come from. If you feel like the AI models that are in existence today um, are not representative of your community, you have all the power to be able to do something about that. And that's a great example of that.
Thank you.
Appreciate the question.
We'll have Ananya.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. It was very interesting. In your talk, you gave a lot of examples of the different uses of AI for good. So I was wondering which AI use case across any sector do you think will most dramatically improve quality of life for the next decade?
It's another great question, Ananya. I think at the end of the day, it depends on whose quality of life that we're talking about, right? And it depends on that's a very, very, I guess, individualized question as far as what impacts your quality of life might be different than what impacts my quality of life. So I don't know if I have an answer for you as far as like a kind of an overarching thing, but as it pertains to, for me, the way I see it at the end of the day, because AI is so embedded in our lives today, for me, the importance is making sure that the way that we engage with AI is safe and is ethical, and that will have a direct impact on our quality of life. And there are certain principles that apply across the board on that one, Ananya. So it's not necessarily like use case specific. Things like making sure that data privacy is upheld, right? That's across the board, regardless of what the use case is. And so again, it comes back to those 7 principles that I was, talked about before. But if we can at least make sure that the harms of AI, which can happen across the board, regardless of which sector we're dealing with, if we're looking at those in an intentional way, then our quality of life, regardless of what that might look like for each of us individually, will naturally be improved. Or that's my hope, at least.
Great, thank you. We'll do 2 more in person. And take it over. Excuse me.
Hello, thank you for the talk. So I was just wondering, in general, AI nowadays has sort of become it's sort of a frenzy, right? And a lot of companies that are trying to implement it to get in on the hype are sort of doing it in a quick and dirty way. They're not really taking the time to make sure it's ethical, and you can see that sort of with, for example, things like vibe coding. A lot of those applications are not very secure, not very safe. And so I was wondering, while we can personally make sure that our projects with AI are ethical, how can we sort of make that mindset sort of spread throughout the entire movement of AI and ensure that everyone is sort of thinking in that same manner?
Yeah, another great question. So I think there are a number of things here, right? And this kind of touches on the regulations that we talked about as well, as far as, we want to be innovative, right? We want to, the innovation to happen, while at the same time, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a safe way. And that's a tricky one because, let's just talk here about the US, right? Technology companies and startups are popping up all over the place that are using AI, as you clearly, pointed out, rightfully so there. But where are the regulations around making sure that they follow certain best practices or standards? We have good regulations as it pertains to things like data privacy, generally speaking, right? When we talk about personally identifiable information, and making sure that there's something there to protect our users. But when it comes to the training of these AI models and the use of these AI models in the products, I think that's where we fall quite a bit short from a regulatory perspective. And so at the end of the day, the way that I look at it is these startups and these technology companies, if they don't incorporate whatever principles you want to talk about, 7, 10, doesn't matter which principles we deem are important here. But if they don't incorporate it, there are too many examples of startups that completely went under because they misused the data, right? Or their use case wasn't properly thought out, and it caused some type of impact to a community that was quite negative. And so things naturally have a way of kind of working their way out in that sense, but unfortunately the damage is already done by then, right? And so how do we get ahead of that where the damage doesn't have to happen? And I think that's where the regulatory environment needs quite a bit of maturity in order to support the innovation while at the same time providing guardrails and boundaries, and testing frameworks, right, around how do you ensure that this is actually safe. And that's not, it's not an easy task. It's complicated, but it's not impossible either, right? This is something that is very doable if we actually just are intentional about it. It's a great question.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I would just like to mention, you mentioned keeping a human in the loop for some of these systems, but there has been talk of auto art generation in other areas where AI might be reducing the amount of human impact or human value of their creations. So going forward, could you compare this to the Industrial Revolution on a larger scale or something like that? And what steps are being taken to make sure that human creations are still valued in that sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are a few examples more recently, and you'll see this. I don't know if you search on PJMF and some of the work that we've been doing recently, where we're partnered with creative individuals and artists and so on that have used AI to help kind of expand on their creative approach. And so I think there are good examples out there of how the two can work together in a very like symbiotic way. But at the same time, again, it comes back to this idea of we don't want to close the door completely on this, right? And I'll just give a quick example. I mean, I'm old enough to kind of talk about this, but back in the day when the internet first came, right? Universities actually banned the internet. I don't know if any of you know this or not, because it was considered, what we would consider today, using ChatGPT to write your papers and cheating and stuff like that, right? It was looked at in a very, very negative way at the time. And that kind of, unfortunately, kind of took some universities, not all of them, but some of them, kind of fell a little bit behind on that because of that. And so it's the same exact thing, right? Initially, when these LLMs came out, they were banned by a lot of institutions and so on, but eventually they kind of came back. And so how do we, again, engage with these things in a proper way to allow us to understand how we can move forward with it, right? Versus just completely closing the door and saying, well, we're not going to engage with it on a creative level either, right?
Thank you. Right now, can we please pin Sophia and Sam Voth from our CogWorks course to do a t-shirt presentation?
I'll add that we selected CogWorks on purpose. Ryan Soklasky, who created the CogWorks course, is currently working at Anthropic, helping to build Claude. And so we thought it was very significant to have the CogWorks class help out with the t-shirt presentation. So it's excellent. Go ahead and you can unmute yourself if you're in the CogWorks class for t-shirts.
Hi, I'm Sophie Cherniak. I'm from the CogWorks course. I loved your presentation. I loved hearing about all the important principles and considerations that go into AI development, sometimes before the development even starts, especially since technology does have a large impact on society.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I truly, really, I was just really impressed with all the questions that you've all asked, the deep level of thought you're all putting into it. This is your future, right? And so it's up to all of us to kind of be engaged in this process, and just really, really excited to hear all these amazing questions that you're all bringing. And so thank you for that. And let's stay connected for sure so we can keep the positive vibes moving forward here. And thank you, Sophie, as well.
Hi, I'm Somewhat. I thought your presentation was really interesting, especially because I'm interested in like the future of AI applications, and, like how it will integrate with software in the future. So that's why I thought it was like especially interesting. And we would like to thank you with the BWSI shirt.
Awesome. That looks great. I can't wait to receive it. Thank you all for that. I'm looking forward to wearing it with pride. So. Awesome. Well, thank you all again for inviting me to participate here. Great session, and thank you for all the thoughtful questions.
No, thank you all, and thank you for coming today, Hazem. And I'm sure what we've been doing with the fact that the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation has been supporting us for several years now has just been fantastic, and really helps make sure that you can all have a great program here. So I don't think there are any announcements today, Sigrid. Checking? Okay, super. And thank you all. As I mentioned to the online people, the online people can post your questions in chat, and we'll send them on to Hazem. For those of you here who didn't get a chance to use your phone and hit those QR codes, I have put those on our BWSI dashboard, so you can create an account, mention BWSI, and post your stories according to the prompts that Hazem has shown during his slideshow. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazem.
All right, UAV, you guys can head out. You can begin the first course to head out.